When most people think of the Library of Alexandria, they imagine some mystical repository of all human knowledge, guarded by wise old men in robes who somehow possess the secrets of the universe. Hollywood has given us this romantic image of ancient librarians as keeper of cosmic wisdom, tragically lost when religious fanatics burned everything down. But here's the thing. Almost everything you think you know about the Library of Alexandria is wrong. The real librarians weren't mystical guardians of secret knowledge. They were something far more interesting. They were the world's first research scientists, government-funded scholars, and academic entrepreneurs who basically invented the idea of systematic knowledge collection and analysis. The real story of Alexandria's librarians isn't about mystical wisdom keepers. It's about brilliant individuals who created the template for every university, research institute, and think tank that exists today. And understanding who they really were might change how you think about the relationship between knowledge, power, and innovation in our modern world. To understand the real librarians of Alexandria, we need to start with why the library existed in the first place. This wasn't some noble pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. It was a calculated political move by one of history's most ambitious dynasties. When Alexander the Great died in 323 BC, his empire was carved up among his generals. Ptolemy I, one of Alexander's most trusted commanders, grabbed Egypt and immediately faced a problem. How do you legitimize your rule over a civilization that's 3,000 years older than your homeland? How do you make Greeks and Macedonians seem like worthy successors to the pharaohs? Ptolemy's solution was brilliant. He would make Alexandria the intellectual capital of the world. If he couldn't claim ancient legitimacy, he would create modern superiority. The Library and Museum of Alexandria weren't just centers of learning. They were weapons of cultural warfare, designed to make every other city in the Mediterranean seem provincial by comparison. This political origin is crucial for understanding the librarians themselves. They weren't independent scholars pursuing truth in isolation. They were essentially government employees, funded by the royal treasury and expected to enhance the prestige of the Ptolemaic dynasty. The first librarians were recruited not just for their scholarship, but for their ability to attract other brilliant minds to Alexandria and make the city synonymous with intellectual achievement. The museum, which housed the library, was structured like a religious institution, with scholars receiving stipends, free meals, and exemption from taxes. But make no mistake, this was the world's first government-funded think tank, and the librarians were its star researchers. The first real librarian of Alexandria was Demetrius of Phalerum, and his story reveals just how sophisticated this enterprise was from the beginning. Demetrius wasn't just a book collector, he was a former ruler of Athens, a student of Aristotle, and one of the most politically connected intellectuals of his era. When Demetrius was exiled from Athens around 307 BC, Ptolemy I saw an opportunity. Here was someone who understood both politics and scholarship, who had connections throughout the Greek world, and who knew how to organize large-scale intellectual projects. Ptolemy brought Demetrius to Alexandria and essentially said, "Build me the greatest library in the world." Demetrius approached this task with the systematic thinking of an Aristotelian philosopher. He didn't just want to collect books randomly, he wanted to collect all books systematically. Ancient sources tell us that Demetrius advised Ptolemy to acquire works on kingship and the art of ruling, but also on every other subject that could enhance royal prestige and practical governance. This is where we get some of the most fascinating stories about Alexandria's book acquisition methods. Ships entering Alexandria's harbor were reportedly searched, and any books found were confiscated, copied, and then either returned or kept, depending on their rarity. The library actively commissioned scholars to travel throughout the Mediterranean, acquiring texts from Athens, Rhodes, Pergamon, and other intellectual centers. Demetrius established the basic principle that would guide Alexandria for centuries: comprehensive collection combined with systematic organization. He wasn't just building a library, he was creating a research infrastructure that could support serious scholarly work across multiple disciplines. The library reached its intellectual peak under two remarkable librarians who represent very different approaches to scholarship: Apollonius of Rhodes and Callimachus of Cyrene. Their rivalry actually tells us a lot about what it meant to be a librarian in ancient Alexandria. Callimachus, who served as head librarian in the mid-3rd century BC, was essentially the world's first information scientist. He created the Pinakes, a 120-volume catalog that was basically the ancient world's equivalent of a comprehensive database. But this wasn't just a list of books. It was a systematic classification of all knowledge, organizing works by subject, author, and literary form. Think Google Scholar meets the Library of Congress classification system, except created by one man in the 3rd century BC. Callimachus didn't just catalog what was in the library. He created categories for understanding how knowledge itself could be organized. His work influenced how we think about classification systems right up to the present day. But Callimachus was also a poet and literary critic who believed in small, perfect works over grand epics. His famous motto was, "A big book is a big evil." He preferred elegant, refined poetry to sprawling narratives. Enter Apollonius of Rhodes, who succeeded Callimachus as head librarian and completely disagreed with his literary philosophy. Apollonius wrote the Argonautica, a massive epic poem about Jason and the Golden Fleece. The conflict between these two men wasn't just personal. It represented different visions of what scholarship should be. Callimachus represented the scholarly approach, systematic, analytical, focused on organizing and critiquing existing knowledge. Apollonius represented the creative approach, using scholarship as the foundation for new artistic achievement. Both were brilliant, both contributed enormously to human knowledge, and their rivalry shows that even in the ancient world, there were debates about whether the primary purpose of academic institutions was to preserve knowledge or create new forms of expression. The fascinating thing is that Alexandria was big enough and well-funded enough to support both approaches. This wasn't a zero-sum game. The library could afford to have systematic catalogers and creative writers, mathematical researchers, and literary critics, all working under the same institutional umbrella. What really sets Alexandria's librarians apart from modern stereotypes is how many of them were practicing scientists who used the library's resources to conduct original research. These weren't just bookkeepers. They were active researchers who understood that collecting knowledge was only valuable if you could build on it. Eratosthenes of Cyrene, who served as head librarian in the late 3rd century BC, is probably the perfect example. Yes, he organized the collection and managed the institution, but he's famous today for calculating the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy, using nothing more than shadows, geometry, and systematic observation. Eratosthenes heard that at noon on the summer solstice, the sun shone directly down a well in Syene, modern Aswan, casting no shadow. He then measured the shadow cast by a vertical stick in Alexandria at the same time, calculated the angle, and used the known distance between the two cities to determine the Earth's circumference. His result was within about 10% of the actual value. This is librarian scientist thinking at its finest, taking information from multiple sources, reports from Syene, geometric principles, astronomical observations, combining it systematically, and producing entirely new knowledge. Eratosthenes didn't just store information, he connected it in ways no one had thought of before. Apollonius of Perga, another librarian mathematician, revolutionized the study of conic sections, work that would later be essential for understanding planetary orbits. Aristarchus of Samos used the library's resources to develop the first known heliocentric theory of the solar system, 1,800 years before Copernicus. These men understood something that we sometimes forget today. The most important function of libraries isn't just to preserve existing knowledge, but to provide the resources and intellectual environment needed to create new knowledge. They were librarians, but they were also research directors, managing an institution designed to push the boundaries of human understanding. The decline of Alexandria's library system reveals just as much about the nature of knowledge institutions as its golden age does. Contrary to popular mythology, the library wasn't destroyed in a single dramatic event by religious fanatics or foreign invaders. Instead, it died slowly as political priorities shifted and funding dried up. By the 2nd century BC, the Ptolemaic dynasty was weakening, facing internal rebellions and external pressure from Rome. As the royal treasury grew strained, support for the library and museum declined. Scholars began leaving Alexandria for better opportunities in Rhodes, Athens, or Rome. The brain drain was gradual but devastating. The last great librarian we know of was probably Apollodorus of Athens in the 2nd century BC. After him, the position seems to have become more ceremonial, less focused on active scholarship. The library continued to exist for centuries, but it was no longer the dynamic research institution it had been during its golden age. This gradual decline tells us something crucial. Knowledge institutions are only as strong as the political and economic systems that support them. The Librarians of Alexandria weren't just scholars. They were part of a larger ecosystem that included royal patronage, international networks of intellectuals, and a political system that saw investment in knowledge as investment in state power. When those supporting conditions disappeared, even the greatest library in the ancient world couldn't sustain itself. The real lesson isn't about the tragedy of lost knowledge, it's about the conditions necessary to create and maintain institutions that can advance human understanding. Lessons for the modern world. Understanding the real librarians of Alexandria offers surprising insights into our modern debates about knowledge, research funding, and the role of institutions in advancing human understanding. First, these ancient librarians understood something we sometimes forget, that collecting information is only valuable if you have the tools and expertise to make sense of it. Callimachus didn't just accumulate scrolls, he created systems for organizing and accessing knowledge. Modern parallels are obvious. Having access to the entire internet is worthless without search algorithms, databases, and skilled information professionals who can help navigate the overwhelming abundance of available data. Second, the best Alexandria librarians were interdisciplinary thinkers who combined careful scholarship with creative problem-solving. Eratosthenes could calculate the Earth's circumference because he was simultaneously a mathematician, geographer, astronomer, and poet. In our age of increasing specialization, Alexandria reminds us of the power of broad, systematic thinking. Third, the political origins of the library remind us that knowledge institutions never exist in a vacuum. They require sustained investment, political support, and clear understanding of why systematic inquiry matters for society as a whole. The Ptolemies funded the library because they understood that intellectual prestige translated into political power. Modern societies need to grapple with similar questions. Why do we fund universities, research institutes, and libraries? What do we expect in return? Finally, the gradual decline of Alexandria shows us that knowledge institutions are fragile. They can't survive on intellectual merit alone. They need ongoing political support, adequate funding, and constant renewal of mission and purpose. The librarians were brilliant, but they couldn't maintain their institution once the broader society stopped valuing what they did. The real librarians of Alexandria weren't the mystical keepers of secret wisdom that popular culture imagines. They were something both more practical and more inspiring. They were the world's first professional researchers, funded by government grants to advance human knowledge and enhance their society's prestige. They understood that libraries aren't just about preserving the past, they're about creating the future. They combined systematic collection with creative analysis, broad learning with specialized expertise, individual brilliance with institutional support. They were simultaneously scholars and entrepreneurs, researchers and administrators, idealists and pragmatists. Their story reminds us that the advancement of human knowledge has always required more than just individual genius. It requires institutions, funding, political support, and clear understanding of why systematic inquiry matters. The Librarians of Alexandria created a template for knowledge institutions that we still follow today. Bring together the best minds, give them access to the best resources, and create an environment where systematic inquiry can flourish. In our digital age, when information is abundant but wisdom seems scarce, the Librarians of Alexandria offer a crucial lesson. It's not enough to have access to knowledge. You need skilled professionals who can organize it, analyze it, and help others make sense of it. You need institutions that can sustain long-term inquiry, and you need societies that understand why supporting systematic learning is essential for human progress. The next time someone dismisses librarians as outdated, remember Eratosthenes calculating the size of the Earth, or Callimachus creating the first comprehensive classification system, or Apollonius advancing both mathematics and literature. The real librarians of Alexandria weren't just guardians of books. They were architects of human knowledge, and their legacy lives on in every university, research institute, and yes, every library that continues their work today.